Hello there. While building Glamli, my dissertation project, I got a bit of feedback from my advisors about the wording of the application. I used plain language where it was easy, like columns to learn from, instead of input features. But where I couldn't find a natural alternative like one hot encoding, I just used the term. So, non-expert using a machine learning application like Glamli would breeze through one page, but on the next page, he or she would hit a wall. So, one of my advisors put it simply: when you're using an LLM, it's easy to ask an LLM to explain things like you're a 10-year-old. So, why couldn't I apply the same idea to the whole app? That comment actually sent me down a research rabbit hole, and I found a Microsoft paper, specifically this one, "Speaking the Right Language" by Palta and colleagues in 2025. So they analyzed around 2,500 Copilot conversations and compared the expertise levels against the level the AI responded at. So, two findings mattered for Glamly. First, tone mismatch barely matters on simple tasks, but on complex tasks, it hurts the satisfaction quite a lot. So the user isn't satisfied if they're mismatched on tone. And for Glamly, building an ML model is about as complex as it gets for a non-expert. Second, users engage when the AI spoke at their level. So experts kept talking to expert responses, novices to the novice ones. So where it's applied. So here's how Glamly applies those findings. There isn't one kind of expertise actually in Glamly, and there are two, and they're independent. First is the machine learning expertise, which will be gathered during sign up. So if you notice, the question here asks how the user is familiar with machine learning, but instead of like having a tick box that says I'm a novice or I'm an expert, it just describes the behavior that you want or the user wants. So, for example, I'm new to machine learning, explain the terms and tell me why each step matters. And we can add like have oops. Okay. Then we create a project. One. And then we can choose dataset. So I already have a dataset loaded here. It pulls the CSV and the text. And then this part actually asks for the dataset familiarity. So you could say I'm familiar. Oops. There you go. Now Glamly knows about the information about the user. So these are actually suited to the machine learning familiarity and dataset familiarity of the user. And we can actually see this better on the domain page. Hold on. So the clearest example of this is actually the domain page. The same field gets like 3 different labels depending on your level. So for example, this is for the novice level. As you can see, you can focus on this label, columns to learn from, and columns to predict, and the description of what the current setup is. Using the columns to learn from, the model will estimate the number in age, and then what you're doing, the column to predict, columns to learn from. So if we switch the expertise, let's say know the basics of ML. So this is the intermediate. Click on domain. Now it sort of like have an idea that you already know input columns and target columns. And then the question type also changes, like predict a number, predict a category, find groups. And as you move on meaning you change your expertise, meaning your comfortability with ML. Click again on domain. Now it uses the actual ML terms like task type, target variable, input features, and it trains the remaining features to the regression age. So let's use classification and choose Y. So it trains on the remaining features to classify Y, which is a binary, meaning it's either yes or no. So yeah, it changes depending on how your expertise are and how familiar are you um, with the dataset. After reading the paper, Speaking the Right Language, the impact of expertise alignment and user AI interactions, and applying the findings on Glamli, it actually opened up more questions for me. Specifically, on the paper, uh, the the Copilot guesses the level of expertise of the user, and usually the paper states that it's better if the level of expertise of the AI is a bit lower than the level of expertise of the user, so maybe one level lower. But the problem is in Glamly, the user actually chooses the level of expertise. It doesn't guess, so the user could either choose to be an expert, it could be an intermediate, or a novice. So that's also another factor to put in on the application. What happens if the user is actually choosing lower or higher exact? Will it affect the user satisfiability? So those are probably questions that hopefully I could answer once the dissertation is done. All right, thanks. So I also created the full breakdown of this discussion on a blog. So I'll link it below. Thanks.